Hi, everyone. My name is Nick, but I go by Minnow or MinnowDev on the internet. I've been doing indie development for, I guess, around 8 years now. Um, Made two games, and one has recently kind of popped off. So I guess I'm here to talk about a little bit about its development and some other things about being an indie developer and all that kind of good stuff. So yeah, uh, thanks for coming out. Um, so yeah, let's go. Um, so I actually graduated from Georgia Tech and with a degree in computer engineering. That's how I know how to program. I'm also the artist for all the art you see on screen and in my games. And that's just kind of a hobby. I actually picked that up while I was at Georgia Tech. I started learning art and just kind of continued it until I got good enough to draw for my own games. Um, but after graduating Georgia Tech, I went to work for mobile gaming companies, specifically one out in California called Cree. Worked there for around 2 years, and then I quit that and worked for another one called Colopal for another year and a half or so. And over that time, I sort of saved up enough money to sort of go off on my own. I'd also gotten very frustrated with a lot of upper management, that kind of thing, disillusioned with a lot of it. So I thought I could do better. So I decided to go off and become an indie developer. Um, and it's been quite the experience, quite the journey. I quit in late 2016. I started development on my first game, Maiden and Spell, in early 2017, and it came out 3 years later. So let me just talk about a little bit about my first project. Uh, Start with. So it is a bullet hell fighting game. Um, Basically, you're one on one, and if you are familiar with like Toho or something like that, it's kind of like that but PvP. So you're using basically each character has their own little bullet patterns, and you try to hit each other with them. And it's kind of the idea that I had in my head forever. Like I'm sure everyone who wants to become a game developer has that one idea that's kind of like, oh, I want to make this game. And like for me, this was that kind of game. Um, so it's the first thing I made, and I developed a lot of stuff for it. Just I've got a little video of it in action. This is some I would say pro players, but because it's not like an esports scene or anything. But there's pretty competitive people who play this game even to this day, which I'm surprised by because I thought it would be dead in like a month. But this is kind of the vibe. Each character has their own color. So you've got like the green character fighting against the teal character in this little thing, and they've all got their own moves, and they're just trying to hit each other. Uh, and you've got a certain number of hearts, and if you lose all your hearts, you lose. And so yeah, it's just kind of that sort of PvP game. I won't play the whole match because it's quite long, but you get the idea. Uh, how do I get to the next slide? There you go. Okay, so Maiden and Spell. It took me around 3 years exactly to complete. So it was from early 2017, and then I released it February 2020. And I developed quite a few things for it. It was the development was kind of slow at first. I wasn't really sure if I wanted to make it my full time thing, but I suddenly got far enough that I just decided, yeah, let's power through it. Um, and over the course of development, I gained a lot of experience, and I developed a lot of things, both programming wise and like sort of like on the marketing side. So first off, it is a PvP game, so I kind of used a lot of my mobile gaming knowledge about how netcode works and how to make like a multiplayer experience run kind of smoothly even on like a low connection, or how to make all that very smooth. And I put that in sort of the code so that you could have this very smooth PvP experience over the internet, where you'd be firing bullets back and forth, and it wouldn't seem like there'd be a lot of lag. There's like a little bit of there's like custom rollback code that works specifically for my game, um, that makes it a little bit very smooth, and that's one thing that people praised about the game quite a bit. I think like the top review says Blackmagic netcode, and I'm very proud of that. So I also kind of developed my own aesthetic style with the art. I wasn't a professional artist or anything, but I had some certain ways of making, the character sprites very quick to draw, and it was this kind of unique, floaty, magical, girly kind of thing, I guess you could say. But it's very distinguished, and it doesn't look like a lot of other indie games. So I think that's kind of an important part. I gained a lot of experience. There's a lot of mistakes that I made during Maiden and Spell's development. Around marketing, around development. I coded it in one way and then end up having to refactor a bunch of stuff, or uh, I would spend a lot of time marketing it in ways that weren't particularly effective, while kind of neglecting other ways that would have been more effective. Um, I would spend a tremendous amount of energy making up Twitter posts when, um, you know, uh, those didn't really matter very much in all at the end. But yeah, there's a lot of stuff that I learned over the course of making Maiden Spell, and I also got a small fan base out of it. As I said, there's still people who play it to this very day, even 4 years later. Um, and it's nice to have like a Discord full of people that are excited for whatever you decide to make, and that's very valuable in and of itself. So I had all these things, and in terms of success, I basically it just broke even, is what I would say. I had a certain amount of money that I started the project with, that I had saved up over the course of making mobile games for companies, and I burned through a little bit of that, developing it over 3 years. And when all was said and done, I had just a slight bit more than I started with. So that's pretty good for a first outing. Not all the indie developers have that kind of luck or success or anything like that. So it worked out for the most part. But I thought I could do better next game, so I decided to try to make another game and um, not repeat many of the mistakes. So do all the good things without doing the bad things. So this time I had an idea right out from the get go, which I'll get into a little bit later. I would try to make a cleaner code base. So I sort of knew what kind of thing I was making this time around. So I wasn't, crawling in the dark for a lot of like the prototyping and stuff. And I used that to make sure that the code base was as clean as possible, so it'd be very easy to make content later. Spend my efforts marketing in ways that were more effective. This is kind of like a personal thing, probably, but it if you're putting posts together for various websites like Twitter or Instagram, and they're not getting any traction, and you're putting a lot of effort into them, that's like, one, a lot of effort putting into them that's not paying off, but two, it kind of like weighs on your mind a little bit, and it's quite draining to do that. So this time around, I would focus more on conventions where I think a multiplayer game would kind of shine, which is the way it wasn't with Maiden and Spell. I think I took it to conventions, and people really loved playing it at conventions, whereas on Twitter it wasn't getting very much traction. But also in Steam posts, because I think that Steam has done more to recently to push sort of blog posts and community posts to people, and try to win at the Steam algorithm, because people in the end buy games on Steam, not on Twitter. So that's one way that I would try to improve my efforts. Another one was, and hopefully this doesn't sound too cynical, but make a game with slightly broader appeal. One thing about Maiden and Spell is that it wow, it's not letting me scroll. It the comment that I would commonly get when I took it to conventions is, I bet someone would really like this, which was true. Like some people really, really did like this, but it was kind of a niche product, I think. Not, Bullet Hell. I think there's some people who really, really like Toho. There's some people, there's a very small number of people who kind of like those classic shmups, like Mujihime Sama or all the other, things. But I wouldn't say it's like a broadly popular um, genre among like most people who play indie games. So I would try to make something that's like a little bit more, everyone, or well, I wouldn't say everyone would like it, but more people would like it, and be more keen to share it with their friends and stuff like that. And also, I didn't list it here, but try to reuse as much as made in this spell as I can, because that's a great idea. Just reuse things that you made previously for your new things, and you can make new things faster. Um, why is this age restricted? Interesting. That is fascinating. Okay, so um, real quick, just for context, this is the kind of game we're talking about. This is footage from the quote unquote world race. What Rabbit and Steel is a rating roguelike. So what that means is, if you've ever played a game like World of Warcraft or Final Fantasy 14 and done the high end raids, um, I know that if you haven't, this probably looks like chaos. But the idea is that there's these coordinated boss fights that you all have to work together as a team to fight, and they all have very very complicated mechanics, and it makes it a very challenging experience. But the thing about those games, World of Warcraft and Final Fantasy 14, is that to actually play those boss fights, you have to like level up a whole character. You have to, grind for gear. You have to do a 400-hour main story quest, et cetera, et cetera. You have to do a lot of things to actually get to the part where you're fighting bosses with other people. And then when you fight bosses with other people, you have to find 8 to 20 other people who have also already done all those things previously mentioned to play with you. So it's like very limiting. So I wanted to make something that was just the really interesting, mechanically complex boss fights, that is easily accessible, and you could just like invite your friends and play it. So that was the goal with the game. This is obviously looks very, very chaotic because I chose a video that's like the hardest difficulty in the game. If you look at normal mode, I'm not sure if there's like a normal mode video in the thing. Nope, maybe not. I don't want to scroll through my YouTube too much. But yeah, that's the idea. So the inspiration was kind of like I play a lot of Final Fantasy 14 personally, and I also watch a lot of YouTube content about MMORPGs because I don't know, I've lost control of my life. Uh, but in one of these YouTube video essays, basically it noted that a lot of the stuff that was that used to be in MMOs, like you used to have all this stuff like PvP and maybe some sort of um, world that you'd have to have these interesting interactions with people with, or like maybe you'd have some sort of cops and robbers dynamic where you had player killing and people who go after the player killers or stuff like that. And a lot of those things have been slowly over time chipped away at by other specialized games that do that thing. So, for example, if you wanted the MMO PvP experience, League of Legends and stuff like that, or MOBAs in general, offer a very, very similar thing, but it's doesn't require like a gear grind, or you're not going to lose to someone just because they have better gear than you or something like that. So it's fair, and people seem to enjoy those more. And for like the sandbox experience, you have people going to like Minecraft or Rust or something like that, instead of playing like a gigantic MMO for the social online experience. So the YouTube video pointed out that rating the multiplayer boss fight aspect of it was kind of the only thing that MMOs still had completely to themselves. So I thought like, hey, I could do that. if you play Final Fantasy 14, I'm not sure how many people here do, but if you do, you probably know that like raids have this very certain vibe to them, that they're very, very close to bullet hell nowadays. You just have these sort of spreads out and just stacked together, and dodge projectiles and dodge AoEs and all that stuff. This coordinated dance basically that you have to perform. And I felt like I could make that with a lot of Maiden Spells code because I already had the netcode set up. I already had the 1v1 stuff, and I could, put everyone on the same team, make it 4-player, use all the same things basically. Because it's just sending information over the internet with this specific way to roll it back so that the bullet patterns work. Uh, it also seemed like something that people would like. Final Fantasy 14 is wildly popular, and even though the video before probably looks very incomprehensible for someone who hasn't played an MMO, I think that uh, people who have experience with MMOs would kind of look like that and like, oh, that looks like a fun game to do. Um, so yeah, I kind of had this idea of how I could simplify it and turn it into my own little game. And also, I could make it a roguelike because just boss fights back to back probably wouldn't be very fun. And some sort of you know uh, variety, I guess you'd say, with how each run worked back to back would work real well with the sort of mechanic boss fights, I think. So plus roguelites are popular, so that's also a plus. Um, so with that in mind, I had a couple goals that I wanted to do to make the sort of simplified rating experience work. And one was kind of design the game around Discord. One thing I learned from Maiden and Spell is that people play in Discord if you're playing a multiplayer game. Um, when I initially released Maiden and Spell, I had this lobby list. You could open up a public lobby or a private lobby or stuff like that, and I had all these systems around that, and you could search through lobbies. And eventually, I just replaced the search through lobbies buttons with a link to the game's Discord because that's where people play. you just If you can't find a match, come to the Discord, and we had a lot of good Discord events and stuff like that, and people generally enjoyed playing the game in Discord. Like there were other Discords dedicated to the game as well. So I kind of wanted to take that experience and say, like, okay, Discord exists in the world. I'm going to make my game based on the assumption that Discord will continue existing in the world. So there are certain things that you need to make it a good Discord game, I guess. You need public and private lobbies, good net code because you never know who's playing with who. Like, it's not necessarily the people in your Discord are all going to be on the East Coast of the U.S. You have to make sure that even if it's kind of a subpar experience, that like people around the world can play with each other, and also playable with any number of players. If I had to say, if you have to be like, oh, you need 4 players to play this game, or you only 2 players can play this game, for example, then if you need too many players and you don't have that many people in your friend group, then you're not going to be able to play the game without inviting someone. That's a barrier to entry. But also, if it's too few, then it's you have to leave people out, which is never a good fun thing to do. So playable with any other players is kind of also important. So that's the goal, to make it kind of a hop in, play on Discord kind of game. Goal 2, make the game obvious. That's probably funny to say considering the video that I showed, but most of the game on normal mode is a little bit more obvious. You can see here, there's an AoE. You can't stand in this, and you have to spread out. So you can't overlap the circle with your hitbox. So you just have to dodge and spread out and stuff. Final Fantasy 14, which it takes a lot of inspiration from, has a consistent set of symbols that you kind of learn over the 400-hour story quests. Like, oh, this means a stack marker, or oh, this means you have to spread out, etc. But I didn't have a 400-hour tutorial to ease players in. Like, they had to get into the game and be super obvious exactly what you're supposed to do immediately. So what my solution was to just tell people what to do. So you just have little timers that say spread out and stuff. And there's a lot of other small micro things that I've done to kind of make things obvious. For instance, certain effects are brighter on your screen if they're targeting you versus targeting other players, that kind of thing. But yeah, the idea is just to make it a very, very obvious game so that people can pick it up and play, even if they aren't too familiar with MMOs or aren't too familiar with this game in particular. So that's goal number three. So goal number three, get players playing ASAP. Don't interrupt. One thing that a lot of indie um, developers do nowadays, and one thing that I was particularly guilty of, or well, I wouldn't say I was guilty of it in Maiden Spell, but is lots of loading screens, lots of cutscenes, lots of interruptions. You'll walk into a room and it'll interrupt it with a cutscene, and then you'll walk into another room and you'll have another cutscene, et cetera, et cetera. And that's fine if you're sort of having this story that's going on and maybe you really want to tell a story. But for a multiplayer game, there's always this sort of varying interest in like what the story is, I guess. So, um, or another thing is that you just kind of want to play the game, especially if you're just hopping on with friends. So, I took this philosophy of just trying to put you into control as fast as possible and then never ever stealing control from you. So let me actually like hop into the game real quickly and I can just kind of show you what I mean by this. Okay, so you start. This is the start screen. Just click through start run, prepare, and you're on the character select. And you're already controlling your character right now. There's no like loading screens and stuff. Other people, if they're playing with you, let me start up another controller. They can select their character while the first player is still playing. Like they've got this little training dummy to play with, and there's no like menus or anything for the most part. You there's a little menu when you select loot items and when you go to a store, but once you start, everything is controlled the same way. It doesn't ever like steal control away from you to highlight things or anything. You're always in control, and that makes you kind of feel like you're having a one experience rather than something that's kind of broken up over and over again. But yeah, and if you're playing over the internet, I can't show you this very well since I've only got the one client open here. But for instance, if one person has their pause menu open or one person has the store open, so they're going through a menu, it doesn't pause it for the rest of the players. The rest of the players can still like control their characters and do things. So from the start of the run to the end of the run, you keep control, and that was very important for me for this game because I did not want a bunch of loading screens like I had in Maiden and Spell. Um, Goal four: have lots of content. So the game has, if I can recount this, I think I have it on a separate slide about exactly how much things it has in it. But uh, you know, I think that a lot of games are judged by like how much stuff they have in them. And there's a certain amount of like variety you'd expect from especially like a roguelike. You'd want a certain number of bosses, you want a certain number of playable classes or items or something. You don't want you to play like two or three runs and feel like you've seen everything. So one way I achieved a lot of content is to try to having basically make each piece of content extremely easy to make. I see a lot of indie games nowadays that have very, very impressive animation. Like all their enemies are gorgeously animated. They have a lot of fidelity and stuff like that, and a lot of high production value. And I think that's really cool. But I can't do that. I am a solo developer. If I spend a week on an enemy animation, then the game will come out a week later, and it probably means that I will not have as many enemies in my game. So if I can spend a day on each animation, which is actually what it takes to make a new enemy animation for Rabbit and Steel, then I can have a lot of enemies. So I have a lot of enemies in my game. Um, so here's some example code and some examples of what I did. So one thing I had is 10 classes, um, 10 playable classes, and which is quite a bit for a roguelike, I think, at least. I say that a class is about equivalent to if you played Hades, like one of the weapons. So it has like this very different play style. And the reason I wanted to have 10 was it's a multiplayer game. If you're playing with four other players, then even if there's no particular penalty, you don't want to play as the same class as other players. I think there's kind of like this idea that a lot of people get where it's like, okay, you're playing the druid. I don't want to play a druid. Then I want to play the wizard. You don't want to play the same thing as other people. So there would need to be a lot of classes so that people didn't feel like restricted in their choices all the time. So yeah, that's one thing I wanted. So one thing I did for that was one, they have very simple animations, about 30 frames each. I can probably bring one of those up actually. Let's go to probably character sprite. So if I open the druid, for example, you can kind of see these are all her frames of animation. That's one class, just all this, and it's very very quick to just like make this. It's a very simple art style. That's just very thick lines, broad colors. So I think that's very very quick to make, and I just made a lot of them. I also like reused a lot of effects, not just between classes, but from Maiden and Spell. Like the Druid in particular reuses a lot of effects from a Maiden and Spell character. That's not what I wanted to open. Sorry, I meant to close that. But yeah, just reusing a lot of things, and in clever ways that makes it not so apparent that a lot of classes reuse things between them, and it gives it a lot of variety, and it doesn't feel like you're restricted in your choices. So 200 items. Um, I made the backend system for items very very. It's complicated in the backend, but it's very easy for me to make new items now that it's all done. So, this is the code for something called the Talon Charm. What the Talon Charm does is every 5 or so ticks, I think you move, you deal damage to all enemies. So, I have a bunch of stats here. It's kind of like a spreadsheet, but it's just hard coded in. It has a strength of 150. I'm not sure if my mouse is appearing or not, but a strength of 150. Here's its colors. Here's the little bit of code that says, okay, every time you move, um, and discount it, make a variable go down, and when the variable hits 0, push the variable back up and deal damage. And it's just this very very quick thing. So I got into the mode where I could make like 10 to 20 items a day, uh, and 200 items is only 10 days, and that sounds like, oh wow, you could have made a lot more, but and it never actually takes 10 days. There's always complications. You have to rebalance things. You have to uh, fix the art some way or another. It tends to get more complicated, but um, it's very good to just have things where you can make them very very quickly, so you can have a lot of things. And they also have a very simple art style, which helps a lot. I made 30 to 40 boss fights, depending on how you count the boss fights. There's probably around 40 boss animations, or 40 to 50 boss animations. And, the boss fights, sometimes they have two enemies in them. But there's only 13 to 15 frames of animation per boss enemy, so fewer than the characters. They generally just had movement. There's one attack that they each have, or maybe sometimes some of them had two attacks. And then they'd have a KO, like a single frame for their KO. So that was very, very quick. And the boss fights themselves just use different pieces. So I've got a lot of different pieces. In fact, I'm making an API for them for modding, as you can see here. But here's all the pieces. There's like 100 of them. There's quite a few of them, but I'd put together a couple of these different patterns together, and then you'd have a boss fight basically. So like this one is just an AOE targeted somewhere, and then maybe I could combine that with this one, which makes your character fall slightly, or I could combine it with like this one, which knocks your character back, and maybe that would be an interesting mechanic. So all the boss fights are just made from the simple, basically like little Legos that you put together to make a boss fight. And despite how simple it was to make, the boss fights came out really well, and there's all these like coordinated things that are a lot of fun. And I could do that without making bespoke animations for every single mechanic or other things that would take me a very, very long time. I made this variety of content without um, delving into the stuff that would take a huge amount of time. So I could make a lot of boss fights. So that is how you make a lot of content. Uh, Goal 5 released before Dawn Trail. This is peak cynicism, but I had a feeling that yeah, and I not just a feeling. I kind of knew that a lot of people who were interested in the game were bored Final Fantasy 14 players. They saw Rabbit Girls, they saw rating, they were like, yes, I will definitely be playing this. But the problem was that Final Fantasy 14, if you don't know, has content patches. So you have a content patch, you wait a few months, then you have another content patch, you wait a few months, you have another content patch, you wait a few months, you have a new expansion. Um, and so there's peaks and lulls in player interest in Final Fantasy 14. The new content patch comes out, everyone plays it, it slowly drops off, and then they wait until the new content patch. So particularly for me, the last content patch before Dawn Trail comes out early 2024, I think it was, or late 2023. And Dawn Trail itself comes out in June of 2024. So there's a 6 month gap there. And I have a feeling that most of the people would be kind of bored if they were playing Final Fantasy 14. They'd be looking for other games to play. But if I released after Dawn Trail, everyone would be busy leveling characters and playing Dawn Trail. So I did need to release before the expansion. So I had a hard deadline basically, where I think my game would have been a lot less successful if it had released later. So I did work pretty hard for a few months. It was quite the experience, put it that way. But I did release it early and got it out by May 9th. So 2 full months. And yeah, it did really well. In fact, a lot of the people who generally rate in Final Fantasy 14, a lot of the like people who do stuff like World First and stuff like that, took some time to play my game and promote it to their audience, which was very cool of them. And some of them I even ran my own little World First race, which some World First racers from Final Fantasy 14 participated in, which was a very fun event. So yeah, that was a lot of fun and it worked out really well. So some other things that worked out really well. Speaking of things that worked out really well, the roguelike items. I made a bunch of items for the game. I mentioned that I made 200 of them. I released a demo back in October of 2023, and from the feedback from the demo, I kind of got a vibe of what kind of things people liked and what people didn't like. So people liked items that do damage, and people did not like items that prevented you from taking damage. They really liked the damage aspect of it. Um, Also, it, the MMO formula of a GCD combat, like you have a tap target, and then you have like, again, this is kind of MMO specific, but you do a move, you have a global cooldown until you can do another move, and then you do a move, and you do another, you have a global cooldown, you have another move. that kind of lended itself well to like the roguelike items because you could change a lot of parameters in those moves and make really, really interesting builds. Um, One thing that I mentioned on the slide is like the gap between balanced and broken is kind of a point for roguelikes. Like you have a lot of roguelikes that try to prevent you from becoming too powerful because if there's some combo that's too powerful, then people reset over and over until they get that combo. But if you don't have any broken builds, then the roguelike isn't fun. And people constantly say like, "Oh, making breaking the game is part of the fun of roguelikes." So my solution to that is basically the game will tell you how much DPS you do, which is damage per second. It's every single corner of the game is telling you like, oh, this is how much damage you did. This is how much damage your friend did. This is how fast you cleared the fight. Damage, damage, damage. It tells you how much damage you're doing constantly. And so players will go and pick all the items that deal a bunch of damage, or combo well with the items they already have to even deal even more damage. But the actual way to win the game is to not die, aka don't get hit by things. And there are now very few items in the game that uh, prevent you from taking more damage. I mean, there are a few like upgrades and stuff that you can get, but they're not particularly high in number, and also people don't take them very often. Um, so even if players do get this build that does a bunch of damage, and they're like, "Oh wow, I've broken the game," they can still die to just like not doing the mechanics correctly. So I think that worked out really well. Because you have that feeling of making a broken build, but you also have the counterbalance that like the game is still hard despite that. Another thing I wanted to mention is the skill rotation. So basically, in MMOs, you typically have like a lot of different buttons, and you have to press them in the right order, and that's kind of how you attack. One thing I didn't really like about a lot of MMO or a lot of roguelikes, especially like Hades and stuff like that. In Hades, for example, you'd get some like imagine you're using the sword in Hades. I'm sorry, this metaphor will be very distant to anyone who hasn't played Hades one, but like if you get the sword and you have the slash move and the slam move, and then your first upgrade is something that upgrades the slam move. So you start using the slam move more, and then you get another upgrade that upgrades the slam move, and then you're basically not using the slash at all for the rest of the run. You're just slamming over and over and over again. So that felt kind of bad because it felt like there was just very little variety you could have with a system like that because you'd end up just upgrading one move and just using it over and over and over again. Um, so I tried to make the items and upgrades in ways that would make you want to use all of your moves. So, for example, maybe you'd get some upgrade that upgraded your special, which is one of your moves, and you have a primary, secondary, special, and a defensive. So, say you get something that upgrades your special, and you're tempted to just try to continue upgrading your special, but then you see something that says when you use your primary, your special is more powerful. So then you say, oh, okay, well now I have to mix my primary into my rotation. I have to use it every once in a while so that my special is even more powerful. And then you get some secondary upgrade that says, oh, this just is used automatically. You don't have to press the button. So then you're like, oh, okay, I'll take that. So I only have to use my primary and my special. My secondary will just fire on its own. But I can still take items that upgrade the damage of the secondary because it's firing it on its own. And so stuff like that, where it's like all of your moves are trying to be important at the same time, and you're very the times you'll get a build where you're just pressing the same button over and over and over again are very rare. It's kind of the thing I wanted to have in the game. I hope that makes sense. It's probably a little bit vague if you haven't played the game, but something that I think worked out really well. Okay, so I also did all the art. Why Rabbit Girls? My answer is why not Rabbit Girls? It does get your attention just a little bit. I think that I hope I'm not like ruffling any feathers by mentioning it, but recently there was a game that came out that you might have heard of called Concord, where I think a lot of people criticized it for. There were a couple of criticisms leaned against it, but one of them was, that the characters weren't particularly appealing compared to, say, something like Overwatch, or the recently released Deadlock. And I think that there's certainly something to that, where it's like you have to have sort of appealing characters, but also for indie games, I think there's something to having a sort of unique selling point with your characters, where like when I first started, with Rapid and Steel, it wasn't Rapid and Steel. It was just a generic set of fantasy characters. But then I had the idea, like, why not just make them all rabbit girls? And that kind of gets your attention. It's like, you play as rabbit girls in this game. This game is the rabbit girl game. Uh, you play as the heavy blade rabbit and the wizard rabbit and stuff like that. And just that very, very basic, you hear that and you're like, yeah, that sounds like something I want to play, even if you know absolutely nothing else about the game. It's just this very, very easy to explain selling point for the game, with its characters. So, yeah, I think that's kind of like a good way to make yourself stand out in sort of the indie market, where things can be quite overcrowded, and quite difficult to uh, sort of stand out among the crowd with your aesthetics. Yeah, don't forget the simple things going off of that. Like, one thing I added to the game was this is the shopkeeper. She's a black cat, Asha, and you can pet her on the head when you shop, with your mouse. It's very cute. And this took me half a day to make, and everyone talks about it. It's like one of those things. It's like you play as rabbit girls and you pet the shopkeeper, and you can pet the shopkeeper, and it's like, yeah, okay, that's a roguelike I want to play. And they might not know anything else about the game, just that you play as rabbit girls and you can pet the shopkeeper. And it's just those very simple things that, wasn't like this huge programming task, or didn't take me weeks and weeks and weeks to implement, that draw players into the game more than you'd think they would. So one thing. Well, so one thing I wrote is, while your asynchronous sprite loading system and your netcode system is technically important, players will remember the part where you can pet the cat shopkeeper. I do have an asynchronous sprite loading system where there's no loading screens, and my netcode is very good, but people talk about the shopkeeper. Um, so yeah, simple things like that, super super important, and it's easy to lose that when you're programming all the time. So yeah, that's some indie dev advice. And yeah, that's basically all I had to say about it. Thanks for listening. That's sort of the talk. I hope I haven't gone over. I guess they said 30 minutes. It's been about 45. But yeah, thanks for listening. If we have any questions, I can also answer them looking at the chat, um, or any particular. I need advice kind of things is fine too. Beloved Iron Steel, thank you very much. You have a very distinct style with both art and gameplay. Would you ever consider doing a project that deviates from that style? Are you concerned with sticking the style to maintain the player base that you have? Um, I don't think I'd do something that deviates from this style particularly far. Not only because it's not just about, like, oh, I have a certain brand as a developer now. This is just the stuff that's fun for me to draw. One thing that you might notice, from the boss fights, is that the not only are you playing as rabbit girls, the bosses are also girls. There's girls that sometimes transform into dragons. Like, this is a girl that transforms into a dragon, here, and that is just because I draw girls and I don't draw much else. So it's not just it isn't just a matter of, like, oh, I need to stick to a style for my audience. It's I need to stick to a style because that's what I can draw. That's what I'm good at doing. So it's more like that. It's just I have a certain thing that I'm capable of doing, and you could even extrapolate that out to everything else about the game. You know, bullet hell versus like a platformer or something like that. It's just what I'm good at doing, so it's what I'll keep doing. Uh, Even though like if I were to list my favorite games, they probably wouldn't be bullet hell games with rabbit girls in them. They'd probably be something like Rain World or something. But you know, when you're making games, you have a certain skill set, and you want to kind of stick to that skill set. And if you want to go outside that skill set, you need to learn new skills, which is can be difficult. Um, so yeah. How do you pace out work-life balance while working on the project, especially the pre-dawn trail deadline? For the pre-dawn trail deadline, I did not have a work-life balance. I worked probably around 5 to 6 months, just waking up and working for 14 hours a day. Don't do that. Don't do that. It's bad, but I did it because I needed it out. So there wasn't much of a work-life balance. I actually lived with my parents for a bit, so my mother was cooking me dinner. That's how I did it. Yeah, not a good thing to do, and I'm taking things much more slowly now. So now that the game is done, taking weekends off. Um, yeah. I'm sure some other people have much better work-life balance while working on indie projects, but I'm the wrong person to ask for that because I do not have much fun. Um, did you find any particular resource helpful when getting all that netcode stuff set up in Unity? This is in GameMaker, actually. It is not in Unity. It might not seem like that because it's not pixel art, but it is in fact a GameMaker game. Here's the GameMaker code. Um, it's I used to, when I worked in mobile games, I worked in Unity, and I became a Unity hater. I did not like working in Unity, so as soon as I got out, I decided to switch to engines. Even before the uh, all the stuff that they did with the pricing model and stuff like that. I just didn't want to work in Unity anymore, so I decided to work in GameMaker. What resources did I use to improve your art? It's been a while, so I couldn't really say for sure. Mostly it's just figure drawing, and uh, when I first started out art, the thing I did was I just go to Pixiv or whatever and just copies people's art from hand. I didn't trace, but I just like looked at people's art and then tried to copy it very quickly onto my canvas. And then I do that with photographs as well. So stuff like that, exercises like that where you're just croquis or whatever, very quick copying things you see onto paper to get a good fundamentals down. But it does take a while, or well, it's taken me a while to get good at art. There's other people who have gotten better at art much faster than I have. But I've been at it like, geez, like 8 years or something like that. I guess it's been 10 years, something like that. Wow. Um, oh, thanks for including hot seat multiplayer. Oh, no problem. That's another thing where in Maiden Spell, you had the local multiplayer and then you had net multiplayer, and they were in very very different places, like completely different menus, everything like that. And for Rabbit and Steel, I wanted to have it so that you have whatever controllers tap in if you're connected to the internet, whatever. Those are the players in. So yeah. Um, For maintenance spell, you mentioned commenting how well the networking code was. Can you talk a little bit about what techniques you choose, what sort of rollback and predictive algorithm that made it appear so clean? Okay, so here's my netcode secrets. So basically, each game has a game time that they're running on, and they tell people what game time they're running on. So let me go down here to the net calls for um, like let's say an enemy uses an attack in Rabbit and Steel. So this is the enemy attack start. Um, when an enemy attacks, it will call this function, and so it'll tell you the game time that the enemy attack started at. But also with each network message, it's telling you what game time it's at. way up here, I think, with ping. So it starts with this. It starts these messages with this, where it says, okay, here's my time, and here's the time that the enemy started the attack. Down here. Sorry, this is just code, and it's probably incomprehensible to everyone else. But when it does that, it runs an adjusted game time. So it basically says, you know, okay, my ping to the host as a client receiving this enemy attack, my ping to the host is, say it's 200. So they're telling me that they did this 100 milliseconds ago, but my ping is 200, so it's really happened 200 milliseconds ago because it's 200 divided by 2, which is 100, plus the 100 it says has passed since the enemy attack started. So I can say that this enemy attack needs to happen 100 seconds faster. So I basically just roll the enemy attack forward 100 milliseconds. And it's really easy to do that for very large values in both Rabbit and Steel and in Maiden Spell, because all of the things are projectiles. So if something is rolled forward 100 milliseconds, you can say, okay, how far would this projectile go in 100 milliseconds? Okay, just spawn it there instead. And when you have that, it's just very, very unnoticeable, even at very high pings. And at high pings, you can even do some fancy things like slowing down projectiles to make them match on the screen, just very subtly. Um, Stuff like that. So there's a couple things I did like that. But yeah, and also predictive movement. So I'll go to a player movement function. So this is how the player reports movement. Like it gives the player ID that's moving, their X, their Y, the direction they're moving, whether their animation, whether facing left or right, where they're focusing on, and whether they're attacking or not. And what it does is it has this function called read network movement based off all of these things. So it has like prediction points. So if I don't get any more signals from this player, where do I think it's going to move? Where's the last reported movement? Where is it going? How long ago was that movement? So pretend like that 100 milliseconds again. If they were moving this direction 100 milliseconds ago, then they're probably out here. And if they suddenly change direction because of the animations, there's no smooth animations in my game. They just snap from one animation to another. You can just snap the animation at the same time they move, and it'll look very, very smooth. So, actually, I can show you this a little bit if you give me a moment to set it up. Da, da, da. So if I go to put the true, that's true. This is another important thing that you want to have if making a multiplayer game. I've got it set up so I can very quickly test multiplayer through my IDE, and you'll see how that works in just a moment. Give it a second. Hopefully this doesn't crash because I was working on it a little bit before the talk. Surprised it's taking so long to compile. Let me just take another question while it does that. How did you approach iterating the game's concept in early stages of development? Any design questions you really struggled with? 1 second, it started. I'll answer that in a moment. Okay, so here's my 2-client setup. So I've got it set up development-wise. If I hit start run and hit prepare, this client is now the host. Now, on this one, if I hit browse lobbies, it doesn't actually go to the lobby list. It just instantly joins as a client. So this is now the host over here, and this is now a client over here. And I've actually got it set up here as well in my debug down here that it's doing a lag test. So it's actually got a 300 ping between these two clients. It just holds on to the message for 300 milliseconds before sending it. And you can kind of see what that looks like. So if I move something on the host, there's a little lag between it moving on the client. If I quickly change direction, there's just a quick snap in the animation. And I can even go into single player like this, and you can kind of see how the enemy attack gets fast forwarded. So it'll appear on the host screen first, but since it's getting fast forwarded, it appears actually appears at the same time on both clients. So it's just a little bit faster on the client. So you can kind of see how that works. But yeah, that's basically how the rollback works. That just it just speeds it up on the client by however many. In this case, it would be 150 milliseconds because the ping is 300 milliseconds. But yeah, that's how kind of the netcode works. So approaching iterating, testing, iterating. I had a few different ideas when I first started. Like I wanted to have different stats and stuff that never worked out. Like I wanted to have like strength and dexterity and intelligence and stuff like that. But all of that ended up being way too complicated. I think around 5 months into development, I had a certain idea of like, okay, these are the things that I need. These are the things that I don't need. And especially the thing that I talked about in the talk where I was mentioning that I wanted to keep the characters in control of the players as much as possible. Like coming to that conclusion really helped me, helped the design kind of fall into place. Like, okay, this is how it needs to work. You need to move forward by standing in an area because all you're doing is moving and attacking. So to move forward must be standing somewhere. Uh, um, you know, basically trying to remove as many menus from the game as I can. So character select should be you should be in control when you're in character select, that kind of stuff. So that was sort of my north star for the design of the game. How did you balance out when to reuse existing mechanics versus mocking up new ones while maintaining unique encounters? So one thing that I did was I wanted to have one unique mechanic for every boss fight in the game. Sorry, let me mute and cough for a moment. Sorry about that. One unique mechanic for each boss fight in the game, and that's something I kind of accomplished. So if I go back in, this I'm only having one client. I can skip to some mechanics, but basically there's 30 to 40 boss fights, and each one has their own little thing that they do, and then the boss of each stage will combine those things in various ways that will make these sort of unique encounters. So just as a quick example, when quick. I'm going to go use the debug menu to go to a boss fight. So if I say this boss fight, so this is the seamstress prog. We're going to fight her in a second. And her unique mechanic is she has a tether, this tether here, that when it activates, you can't move outside that tether. So I can't move any farther from the boss than right here. And sorry, there's other boss fights that. Give me a second. Sorry. Ah, my throat. Sorry about that. But there's other boss fights that have different mechanics and different boss fights that use that same mechanic uh to make unique attacks. So yeah, you have that one mechanic, but if you go to the boss of the stage, for example, the boss of the frog stage, she'll also use this mechanic in different ways. So I think she'll use it at the start. So she also has this tether mechanic, but she also uses um, other things that the frog use, like these moving circles. Like those are a frog thing, and then this keep moving thing. That's another thing that frogs use. Stop moving, stuff like that. So she combines these mechanics in different ways to make kind of a unique encounter. So yeah, one unique mechanic per boss fight is what I was trying to do, and I think I accomplished it. What was playtesting the game like? Were you only playtested at conventions, or did you find opportunities to grab people from the community of your last game? Yes, I didn't find opportunities to. I did have people from my last game play test the game, and in fact, a lot of the bosses are named after them. So that's kind of a fun thing. If I go to the credits, yeah. So all these people who were kind of professional players, I would say professional, but like pro players of maintenance spell helped me test quite a bit. But also I had the conventions and also I had the demo. The demo's feedback was very, very helpful. Just even watching people play it on YouTube, I could tell where people were getting bored and see things that the testers probably wouldn't inform me of. Because you know the testers were all kind of fans of Maiden and Spell and they didn't want to like say things that would probably be negative. But people in YouTube videos, even if they aren't trying to say things that are not very negative, you can kind of see it in their how would you say it in the ways that were doing things. So one instance I would like to bring up in specific is I had a YouTuber duo or trio, I think, play the demo, and you know they were very excited about the game at first, but then they hit the first shop and they got a story event. So there's if you're playing locally, not online, but locally, you can talk to the characters. And the story event was very very long, like it was 2 whole minutes of dialogue, and you can just see their enthusiasm for the game drain as they talk to this character, even though talking to them was optional. Like you didn't have to talk to it, but of course they're going to, because like they don't want to miss content. And so that was kind of like, okay, yeah, I need to cut down these cutscenes to be much shorter if I'm going to have a story in the game. So the game still does have a story if you're playing alone or playing locally, but it's each cutscene is much shorter than it would have been, and that's kind of like the feedback that you get from having real players play your game. Um, One thing I do regret, actually, while I'm bringing it up, is a lot of the testers played the hardest difficulty because they are gamers, and I probably didn't get enough testing on the normal difficulties, and so the normal difficulty is a little bit harder than I intended it to be. I intended it to be a bit like an easy thing to do, it's where you'd win on your second or third run. But people have commented that the game is very challenging even on normal. So I think that things could have been a little bit easier, and that there could have been a little bit more testing around there. Um, but also, how did I send out builds? I just had a beta branch on the game and just gave the testers keys, so stuff like that. How do we prioritize tasks between disciplines as a solo dev day to day, given that you're doing all the art, design, programming? I wasn't doing the audio. The audio was done by, as you can see in the credits here, had music by Steel Plus. He's a composer that I've worked with quite a few times. He's done stuff for both my last game, this game, and he's done stuff for One Step for Eden, as well as Duelist of Eden and some other indie games as well. Um, but yeah, I didn't do the audio, but all the other tasks, you know, it was mostly just doing what I wanted at first. So one thing that I did early on, I was just in a drawing mood, so I went through and did all of the enemy animations, and that was like a month of just me drawing enemy after enemy after enemy after enemy, and there wasn't a particular schedule, just like you know, oh, this sounds fun today. I'll do that part. As long as I was working towards it, you know, things mostly lined up. And towards the end, there was certainly things where it's like, okay, these are the things that are not done and have to be done, whether I like to do them or not. Uh, but for the most part, I had an idea of what needed to be done and kind of did the parts that I felt like doing on any given day. Um, oh, and also for marketing, one more thing is that I would try to commit to a Steam blog post every month or so. It's not quite every month, but every month to 2 months, just to make sure people are updated on the game. And I think that went really far. I didn't try to update Twitter all the time. Um, in fact, I actually spent a lot less time marketing the game than I did with Maiden and Spell, but I think that my marketing efforts were more successful, not only because I was doing smarter things, but also because the game itself was a little bit more appealing to people rather than a bullet hell fighting game. It was, a roguelike and had rabbit girls, and it was also like FF14 rating, and people really liked the idea. So it was just easier to market, even though I spent less time on it. But yeah, is that all the questions? Did I miss anything? Yeah, thanks for coming out.